There was a time when my smile felt like armor, polished and practiced, something I wore to survive the hours. People thought I was fine, they always do when you're good at pretending. I learned early how to hold myself together, even when every part of me wanted to unravel. It's strange, the way pain becomes a second language. You stop noticing the heaviness because it's always there, like the background hum of a refrigerator, constant, low, and exhausting. I carried the weight of 1,000 quiet heartbreaks, none dramatic enough for the world to see, but sharp enough to carve small wounds in places no one would ever think to look. There were days I felt invisible even when surrounded by people. They'd talk, laugh, live, and I'd float somewhere between them, present, but not really there. The truth is, I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from years of pretending to be strong. Every morning, I'd wake up and build the same version of myself, composed, capable, unshakable. But beneath the routine, there was a silence that screamed. It followed me through mirrors, through hallways, through nights that stretched too long. I used to think healing meant forgetting, that time would eventually erase the hurt. But time doesn't heal what you refuse to face. It only buries it deeper, where it grows roots, and mine had grown thick. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection and wonder who that woman was, the one with steady eyes and an easy laugh. She looked fine, almost peaceful, but peace is an illusion when your soul is starving. I kept busy to avoid the ache. Work, errands, conversations that skimmed the surface, they all filled the spaces where truth might have lived. Friends admired my independence, called me strong, brave, admirable. I smiled and let them believe it. I didn't have the energy to explain that surviving isn't the same as living. At night, when everything quieted, the loneliness would come alive. It wasn't loud, just a dull ache that sat behind my ribs, whispering reminders of everything I'd lost, everything I'd given, everything I'd let die to keep others comfortable. I learned to hold that ache like a secret, like something sacred. It became my companion, familiar and cruel. I told myself it was better this way, that needing no one meant I couldn't be hurt again, that solitude was safety, but deep down I knew the truth. I didn't want to be alone. I just didn't want to be disappointed again. I'd seen what love could do, how it could turn promises into ashes, how it could leave you hollow, waiting for someone who'd already left. I built walls, high and quiet. They kept me safe, yes, but they also kept me untouched. People came and went, but no one ever stayed long enough to notice the cracks. I told myself I didn't mind, that this life, orderly, predictable, empty, was enough. But sometimes in the quietest moments, I'd feel a longing that scared me. It wasn't just for someone's presence, it was for understanding. To be seen, really seen, without judgment or pity. I wanted someone who could look past the surface and still stay. But I buried that want because it felt too fragile, too dangerous. Love had always felt like a risk I couldn't afford again. So I carried on the routines, the smiles, the silence, until one evening something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, no sudden revelation. It was subtle, a pause in the noise, a stillness that made me realize how tired I truly was. That night, I stood by the window, city lights flickering like distant hopes, and whispered to myself the truth I'd avoided for years. I was lonely. I was exhausted from being strong, and I didn't know how to stop. I remember the way that confession felt in my chest, heavy, trembling, real. It was the first honest thing I'd said to myself in a long time. That was the night the weight began to feel unbearable. The night something deep inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't meant to carry it alone. It happened on a night that didn't ask to be remembered. The kind of night where the world feels half-ass, leap quiet streets, tired sky, air heavy with unsaid things. I had come home late from work, my body moving out of habit more than intention. I set down my bag, kicked off my shoes, and stood there in the middle of my living room, not sure what came next. The silence was too loud. The walls felt closer than they should. I tried to distract myself the way I always did: music, Tea, phone in hand, pretending connection lived in pixels, but nothing worked. That night, the mask slipped. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the years of pretending to be fine finally collapsing under their own weight. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and for the first time in years, I didn't hold it in. The tears came fast, unplanned, unpretty. There was no grace in it, no cinematic sadness, just raw, human breaking. My breath caught in sharp gasps, my hands trembled, and all I could think was how tired I was of carrying a life that looked stable but felt hollow. I cried for every version of myself I had abandoned to appear okay, for the love I gave too freely, for the times I said I'm fine when I was anything but, for the nights I begged the universe to make me feel whole again, only to wake up wearing the same ache. It was strange, though in that unraveling, something inside me softened. The world didn't end because I broke down. The roof didn't cave in. No one came to judge or fix or tell me to pull it together. It was just me, breathing through the wreckage, realizing that sometimes falling apart is the most honest thing you can do. When the tears finally slowed, I felt an unfamiliar quiet, not empty, but clear. My heart still hurt, but the ache felt less suffocating, like something had finally shifted. That was the night I understood that strength isn't about holding everything in. It's about knowing when to let go. I didn't know it then, but that surrender, that small, trembling crack was what made room for him to walk in later. But for now, it was just me, and the kind of silence that feels almost holy after chaos. I got up slowly, wiped my face, and caught my reflection in the window. My eyes were red, my hair a mess, my lips trembling, but for the first time in a long time, I recognized the woman looking back. She wasn't pretending, she wasn't performing, she was just, real, and in that rawness I felt a tiny pulse of something I hadn't felt in years' hope. Not the loud, reckless kind that promises rescue, but the quiet kind that whispers maybe someday you'll be okay. That night, I didn't make any promises to change my life or fix my heart. I just let myself be. I lay down without forcing sleep, without forcing thoughts away, and I whispered a truth into the dark. I want to be seen. I didn't know who I was saying it to: God, the universe, maybe just myself, but it felt like a prayer, a plea, a beginning. And maybe that's what healing really is: not a sudden light, but the courage to sit with the darkness and whisper that you're ready to see again. I remember how the air felt heavy yet kind, how the world outside went on, unaware that something quiet and miraculous had just happened inside four walls. I had stopped pretending. I had allowed the pieces to scatter. And somehow, in the middle of that mess, I felt more honest than I ever had in my entire life. What I didn't know then was that this small act of breaking would be the very thing that made space for love to find me again. Because sometimes the heart has to empty itself before it can recognize what it's been waiting for all along. It began quietly, the way most life-changing things do, without warning, without grand entrances. I met him on an ordinary Thursday. I was at the bookstore cafe down the street, the one I always escaped to when the noise of the world became too much. It smelled of coffee and paper, like comfort and time. I remember that I wasn't expecting anything that day, not joy, not conversation, not connection. I just wanted a corner to disappear into, maybe a warm drink to hold instead of my own thoughts. He was there when I arrived, sitting at the corner table I usually claimed, his fingers tracing the rim of a coffee cup as if it were a quiet ritual. I noticed his calm before I noticed his face, the kind of stillness that made you want to breathe slower. Our eyes met for a second, and something inside me stilled. It wasn't attraction, not in the way I'd once known it. It was recognition, like my soul exhaled and whispered, "Oh, there you are." I took the table beside him, pretending not to notice that his presence made the air feel softer. When he glanced up and smiled, it wasn't the kind of smile people give when they want something. It was simple, unguarded, human, the kind of smile that asks for nothing but still offers warmth. I nodded, returned it, and went back to my book, though I couldn't tell you a single word I read that afternoon. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like we both knew how to sit quietly in the same space without needing to fill it. When he finally spoke, it was about the book I was holding. His voice had that low, unhurried tone that makes words sound like they were chosen with care. We talked about authors' favorite lines, the kind of stories that linger long after you've finished them. It was easy, too easy. I kept waiting for the familiar tension, the one that makes you guard your softness, but it never came. When I left that day, he didn't ask for my number, and I didn't expect him to. But I walked home lighter, like something in me had shifted. Over the next few weeks, I saw him again, sometimes by accident, sometimes because I went looking for that same quiet comfort. Each time, the world seemed to slow a little around him. We spoke about everything and nothing: music, rainy days, the strange ways people pretend to be fine. Once he asked me what I loved most about solitude, and I told him, it's safe. He looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, safety isn't the same as peace. I didn't answer. I couldn't. His words lingered long after he left. One evening, the cafe was almost empty, the kind of calm that happens right before closing. I was tired, worn thin from a week that felt endless. When he asked if I was okay, I meant to lie to give the usual answer. But the truth slipped out before I could stop it. No, I said just that, one word, naked and heavy. He didn't rush to fill the silence or fix it. He simply reached across the small table, his hand hovering just above mine, as if asking permission to be there. When I didn't pull away, his fingers rested gently over my hand, warm, steady, grounding, and just like that, something in me broke open. I didn't cry, not this time. I just sat there, breathing in the safety of that small, simple touch. It wasn't romantic in the way movies show it. It was something quieter, deeper, the kind of intimacy that comes when someone holds your pain without asking you to shrink it. When I left that night, I carried that warmth with me like a secret. I thought about how long it had been since I'd felt held, not for what I gave or how I appeared, but just for existing. I realized then that sometimes healing doesn't arrive as grand gestures or declarations. Sometimes it comes in the form of someone steady enough to stay when you tremble, someone who doesn't ask you to explain your sadness, but offers a hand until you find your strength again. That night I lay awake replaying the moment in my mind, the quietness, the calm, the unspoken promise in that touch. It wasn't about falling in love yet. It was about remembering what it felt like to be seen and not judged. That small, fragile memory became my anchor in the weeks that followed. I didn't know it yet, but that embrace, that single moment of stillness shared between two tired souls, was the beginning of everything I thought I'd lost. The beginning of learning that being held isn't a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's the first step toward becoming whole. After that night, our connection unfolded like dawn, slow, unhurried, honest. There was no chase, no drama, no need to prove anything. Just presence. He started showing up at the cafe more often, sometimes already seated at that corner table, other times walking in after me with that same calm smile that seemed to know more than it said. We never made plans, yet somehow we always found each other. Our conversations were never loud or urgent. They moved like gentle rivers, touching everything in their path without flooding it. We spoke about books, memories, and the small moments that most people overlook, the way rain smells before it falls, how silence can hold two people closer than words. He asked questions that didn't pry, only invited. And when I spoke, he listened as if every word mattered, even the ones I stumbled over. There was a stillness in him that made it easy to be unguarded. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be heard without being analyzed, to be seen without being judged. One evening, I told him about my habit of overthinking how I replay conversations, how I prepare for disappointments before they happen, how I've built an entire map of defense mechanisms just to avoid getting hurt again. He didn't tell me to stop or to be braver. He simply nodded and said, "You've survived a lot. It makes sense you built armor, but you don't have to wear it with me." Those words did something to me. They settled deep, like sunlight reaching a place long forgotten. For a while I didn't know what to say. I just looked at him, and he held my gaze without flinching, without needing to fill the silence. Sometimes healing isn't about answers. It's about someone staying quiet long enough for you to hear your own truth. That's what those moments became, small spaces of honesty where I could exist without pretending. We shared fragments of our pasts in pieces, not confessions, not therapy, just human truth. He told me about his own losses, the people he'd watched drift away, the nights he'd spent wondering if love ever really lasts. I remember thinking how rare it was to meet someone who didn't hide behind humor or false optimism. He carried his pain gently, as if it had taught him softness instead of bitterness. That's what drew me in his ability to stay open even after being hurt. It made me wonder if I could do the same. There was one night I'll never forget. The cafe had closed early, so we walked along the quiet streets, the kind that glow gold under lamplight. The air was cool, carrying that faint scent of rain again. He spoke softly, his voice a calm rhythm beside me, and at one point he said, "You know, you don't have to rush healing. Sometimes it's enough just to stop pretending you're okay." That line hit me harder than he knew, because I realized then that healing isn't something you do once and move on. It's a practice, a daily choice to stay open, to keep breathing even when it hurts. With him, I didn't have to perform strength. I could admit the ugly parts, the doubts, the fears, the nights when the loneliness still felt louder than anything else. And instead of fixing it, he'd just stay. Sometimes he'd tell me stories about his younger days, about how he learned to make peace with things he couldn't control. Other times we'd sit in silence, the kind that felt like understanding. There were moments when our hands brushed, accidental, fleeting, but every touch felt like a promise. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I started to notice small changes in myself, the laughter that came easier, the mornings that didn't feel as heavy, the way I began to look forward to simple things, coffee, conversation, the way his eyes softened when he listened. It wasn't that he filled the emptiness. It was that he helped me see it differently. He showed me that being seen doesn't mean being exposed, and being loved doesn't mean being perfect. I used to think healing came from grand realizations, but it turns out it lives in the quiet, in gentle voices, shared silences, unspoken safety. And every time we spoke, every time he looked at me like there was nothing to fix, I felt something inside me realign. It was slow, almost invisible, but it was happening. For years, I'd built walls to keep the pain out, but I hadn't realized those walls also kept love from coming in. With him, the walls didn't shatter, they just softened. One by one, they let the light through, and maybe that's what love really is, not someone arriving to rescue you, but someone walking beside you while you rescue yourself. That's what he became for me, not a savior, but a witness. Someone who held space for my becoming without asking for proof. In his quiet way, he taught me that healing isn't loud or sudden. It's made of small moments stitched together by presence. And in that stillness, in those long, gentle conversations, I began to feel something I hadn't in years: peace. Trust didn't come rushing in like a wave. It came quietly, like light seeping through curtains after a long night. It began with the smallest moments, the way he showed up when he said he would, the steady calm in his voice when I started to pull away, the gentle patience he never seemed to run out of. I had spent years preparing for people to leave, rehearsing disappointment like a habit I couldn't unlearn. But he stayed. Every time I expected absence, he brought presence instead. Every time I built a wall, he waited at the edge, not asking to be let in, just reminding me he wasn't going anywhere. It unnerved me at first. I wasn't used to consistency. I was used to grand beginnings and quiet endings, people who loved the idea of me but not the weight of my truth. I had been both adored and abandoned, and sometimes those two things felt too similar. So when he kept showing up not in grand gestures, but in small, steady ways, I didn't know how to hold it. Part of me wanted to run. The other part, the tired part, just wanted to rest in it. I remember one evening vividly. I'd had a long day, the kind that claws at your nerves until you're raw. He called, asking if I wanted company. I almost said no. I didn't want to be seen when I was brittle. But something in his voice, that softness that never demanded, only offered, made me say yes. When he arrived, he didn't ask what was wrong. He just brought tea, set it on the table, and sat beside me. No fixing, no questions, just quiet presence. I don't know how long we sat like that, but somewhere in that silence, the fear that usually lived in my chest began to loosen. I leaned slightly toward him, a small movement, but to me it felt monumental. His arm moved around me slowly, deliberately, as if asking permission. And when he held me, I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to apologize for taking up space. That embrace wasn't about romance. It was about safety. I could feel his heartbeat steady, human, real, and in that rhythm, I found something I didn't know I'd been missing. Peace that didn't ask me to earn it. Trust, I learned, isn't built through words. It's built through presence, through showing up again and again until fear begins to lose its voice. That's what he did. Slowly, carefully, he taught my guarded heart that it was safe to exhale. Still, there were moments I pulled back. Old habits don't fade easily. I'd catch myself expecting rejection, waiting for the shift that always came the moment affection turns into distance. But every time I braced for it, he'd simply look at me with that quiet steadiness and say, "I'm not going anywhere." 4 words, that's all. But each time, something inside me unclenched a little more. One night, when the air was heavy with the scent of rain again, we sat on my balcony, sipping coffee under a sky that looked like it was holding its breath. I told him I was scared of needing him. Scared of being happy only to lose it. He didn't try to convince me otherwise. He just said, "It's okay to be scared. I am too." And somehow that made everything easier, because trust doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means choosing to stay open even when fear is present. With him, I didn't have to be fearless. I just had to be honest. Over time, the walls I'd built stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like barriers. I began letting him see the pieces I used to hide, the bad days, the insecurities, the moments I doubted everything. And he didn't shrink away. He just listened, sometimes reaching out to hold my hand, sometimes just nodding, letting silence say what words couldn't. It wasn't dramatic, it was gentle, but it was real. The kind of real that doesn't fade when the moment ends. I started to understand that love doesn't have to burn to be beautiful. It can be soft and steady, like rain nourishing roots you forgot were there. With him, I stopped waiting for the storm. I started trusting the calm. One afternoon, he found an old photograph of me younger, smiling, eyes bright with a kind of hope I barely recognized. I laughed, saying she had no idea what was coming. He looked at the photo for a long time, then back at me and said, "She's still here. You just stopped believing in her." I didn't know whether to cry or thank him, so I just looked away, pretending to sip my tea. But inside, something trembled, the kind of tremble that comes right before healing. That day, I realized trust isn't just about believing in someone else. It's about relearning how to believe in yourself again. And somehow, through his patience, I began to. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Fear didn't disappear, it just lost its power to rule me. And maybe that's what love is supposed to do. Not erase your pain, but remind you that you're more than the sum of it. He didn't rescue me. He simply stood beside me until I remembered how to walk again. And in that quiet, steadfast love, fear slowly turned into trust, and trust into something that began to feel a lot like peace. Healing never came with a grand announcement. There was no sudden moment where everything clicked, no dramatic sunrise that washed away the shadows. It came quietly, almost shyly, in the way I began to wake up without dread, in the way I looked in the mirror and didn't immediately search for what was wrong. There was a softness that began to settle in me, unfamiliar, gentle, and real. I had spent so many years surviving that I forgot what it meant to simply live. But now there were mornings I'd make coffee, feel the warmth in my hands, and smile for no reason at all. He wasn't beside me every second, and yet his presence lingered not as dependency, but as peace. That was new for me, that kind of love, the kind that doesn't consume, doesn't cage, but expands. I used to think love had to be grand to be real, flowers, fireworks, chaos, but this love was different. It didn't demand attention. It grew quietly like roots beneath soil, steady and unseen but holding everything in place. I remember one morning, months after that first rainy night, I caught myself humming while washing dishes. It sounds ordinary, but for me, it was everything. For years, my silence had been heavy, suffocating. Now it was light. I didn't even realize I was humming until I felt him wrap his arms around me from behind. He didn't say anything, just rested his chin on my shoulder, his breath brushing against my skin. I froze for a second, then relaxed into him. The scent of his shirt, faint coffee, cedar, rain felt like home. And that's when I understood. Healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about building a life big enough to hold both the hurt and the hope. He didn't erase my past. He helped me make peace with it. I used to trace the scars on my skin with shame, as if they were proof of something broken. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in gold, he touched one gently and whispered, "You've survived everything that tried to destroy you. That's not broken. That's beautiful." Those words settled into me like a promise. For the first time, I looked at my scars not as reminders of pain, but as evidence of endurance. I had been so afraid of being seen in my entirety, the bruises, the cracks, the trembling parts of me that didn't always make sense. But he saw them all and didn't flinch. That kind of love, the quiet, consistent, patient kind, reshapes you. It teaches you that you don't have to earn tenderness, that you don't have to hide your sadness to deserve peace. One night, as we sat together watching the city lights from my balcony, he asked, "Do you ever think about what it means to be whole?" I thought for a moment before answering. I used to think wholeness meant having everything together, no pain, no fear, just perfect peace, but now I think wholeness is being able to sit with your pain and still find beauty in the moment. He smiled and nodded, like he already knew that's what I'd say. "You've always been whole," he said softly. "You just stopped believing it." I didn't reply, but something in me broke open again, not from pain this time, but from realization. He was right. I had been whole all along. I just needed to stop mistaking my scars for weakness. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. There was no rush in me, no anxiety about what tomorrow might bring. For once, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I was simply there in that moment, feeling safe enough to just exist. The next morning, I looked at my reflection again, the same face, the same eyes, but there was a softness I hadn't seen in years, not the forced smile I used to wear, but something deeper, more honest. Wholeness doesn't mean being untouched by pain. It means knowing that even after everything, you're still capable of love. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who flinched from kindness, who mistook attention for affection, who built walls to survive. And I whispered to her, quietly but firmly, we made it. Because we had. not through perfection, not through erasing the past, but through embracing it. Love had become less about needing someone and more about choosing someone, and choosing myself in the process. There are still days when the silence feels heavy, when memories return uninvited, but they no longer scare me. I've learned that pain doesn't define me, how I rise from it does, and I rise differently now, slower, gentler, stronger. He still holds me sometimes like I might break, but now I know I won't. I know that being held doesn't mean being saved. It means being seen, truly seen, and loved anyway. That's the miracle of it, not that someone found me, but that I finally let myself be found. And as strange as it sounds, I don't think love healed me. I think it reminded me that I was never beyond healing in the first place. It showed me that I could be both scarred and whole, fragile and fierce, broken and beautiful all at once. So now, when he holds me, I don't brace for the end. I just breathe, because somewhere between the pain I survived and the peace I found, I became whole again,